One of the most recent updates surrounding Amazon's The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, involved the orcs. Our official first look at them, revealed through an exclusive interview with IGN, generated lots of excitement for the show. Following very shortly after, we got another short teaser clip with the lines spoken by Elrond at the Council in the Fellowship of the Ring, "For nothing is evil in the beginning," which of course also relates to the orcs as well. So today's video will be your complete, up-to-date summary of everything we know about the orcs so far in Amazon's upcoming show, alongside some of our own orc-related leaks as well. Make sure to like, subscribe, and share, and without further ado, let's get right into it. First off, we received these 6 new images from IGN. The first one, which has been dubbed by many the Assassin's Creed orc, is one of the few action shots we have, in what looks to be some kind of chase scene or village raid, perhaps involving Arondir and Bronwyn's village, as suggested by some other recent photos and context clues. Looking at each of these photos, you can see how the prosthetics are designed with such lifelike details, and each orc has their own unique look. The overall effect is pretty believable, and these orcs look pretty darn terrifying. It's looking like they want these orcs to follow more in the footsteps of the gruesome and scary ones we saw in Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings, and not the purely CGI orcs from the Hobbit film trilogy. The first and most important bit of information we received from the IGN interview is that orcs are low in numbers, down on their luck and fighting for survival. So it seems that just like the elves, men, and dwarves in this show, we'll also see the growth of the race of orcs and how they were scattered and went into hiding after their defeat in the War of Wrath at the end of the First Age. Then, once a dark power soon reclaims control, which of course is Sauron, they will begin to grow in might again. By the time of the War of the Last Alliance at the end of the Second Age, they're at their full power and might. It's easy to notice that many of these orcs look quite thin and not as buff and muscular, so maybe throughout the 5 seasons, they'll get physically stronger from their current weakened state. As we meet them, they're not yet organized into armies. They're a little more scattered, and they've been scavenging, so it's just a different time in their total story. As we continue through the article from IGN, we hear quotes from Jamie Wilson, head of the Rings of Power's prosthetic department, and Lindsay Weber, executive producer on the series. Weber states that, for the showrunners McKay and Payne, that the very first page of their Bible was about orcs. They have a real passion for them, they love practical prosthetics and design, and they felt that they needed exploration given that this is the Second Age, and thousands of years before the events of the Third Age. First of all, we get an insight into how this decision to have practical effects came from McPayne, and how there will still be a difference to the ones that we see in the Third Age. Also, there was mention that we will be looking at their own culture and explore their world of the orcs in this show, giving an even deeper insight into how they live. However, some raise concerns that if we get an overexposure of the orcs and their lives and cultures, then this can make viewers maybe even feel sympathetic for their cause, especially if they are, quote, down on their luck. Another noticeable theme from the photos we've seen is the use of tunnels and the orcs being underground, potentially even hidden away. Wilson states, but really they regressed into the dark in small little groups and hid away, and lived in tunnels and sort of under Middle-earth, because that's the only way they could hide, because of course they were hunted for so long. Also, another reason as to why they're hidden away underground is due to the effects of the sun. This can be seen from the wooden masks or helmets on the top of their heads to protect them from the sun, and from one of our leaks in which we mentioned that the orcs are affected by the sun, and one even burned, so this will be a continuous issue in the first season. However, the most interesting revelation from the article, plot-wise, is around the confirmation of Adar, the evil and corrupted elf who was the leader and father of the orcs, and possibly Galadriel's brother. Wilson states, so this is really them coming back out as they reform under a so-called new leader who's going to lead them forward. So it looks like in the first season the orcs will be rallied and brought together under Adar, who most likely isn't Sauron. So it seems possible that the orcs could unite under Adar before Sauron. We'll just have to wait until September to find the answer for certain. Another interesting revelation from the article is the first on-screen presence of female orcs, where specifically, Lindsay Weber goes on to state, "There are some female orcs that I truly loved, and lore-wise there had to be female orcs, as Tolkien mentioned them multiplying like the children of Ilúvatar." Interestingly, Weber specifically mentions, "But there's one orc in particular who's very, very tall and strong, who has a particularly enjoyable fight with one of our elven characters that I suspect will be, or hope will be, a favorite among fans." This is of course Arondir, being played by Ismael Cruz Cordova, who in this picture on screen is facing off against the hideous orc. We can also recall the quote from the Empire magazine article, where McKay emphasizes the fact of fighting an orc one-on-one as if it were in your kitchen, and how they want to show fights on this more personal level. Another interesting point of note regarding some of the helmets that the orcs are wearing in a couple of these shots is that they look very similar to the elven helmets from the First Age battle scene with Finrod from the teaser trailer. This goes to show just how low the orcs are at this point in their history, by scavenging and using elvish armor for their own. This is not at all how we saw them in the First Age battle scene when they had heavy armor of their own. The in-depth physical details on the orcs, such as their burns, wrinkles, black blood, and cavities in their teeth, are further explained by Wilson, who states, "They're not actually babies, but it's them coming back out from the darkness." So this is early on. For example, if you go to past films about them, you'll see them, and they're quite battle damaged and scarred and all that kind, because there have been lots more battles. This is kind of before the next range of big battles, so there's a lot more smooth texture. There are still wrinkles and lines and shape and form, but they are not so battle scarred, but they are dealing with some skin conditions because of their exposure to the sun. They're coming back out for the first time again, so it's all a bit new. That's why they're not as dark-skinned, not necessarily as muscular, and not as battle-worn as you'd seen in previous productions. Again, this highlights the arc and storyline we'll see with the orcs over the seasons, where they'll develop into these large, physical, battle-hungry beasts by the Last Alliance. To many fans' enjoyment, as mentioned earlier, the role of practical effects for the orcs was again emphasized and quoted as a marriage between CGI and practical, and Weber further explains this by stating, quote, "We work really hard to make our prosthetics really thin and more comfortable for our performers and all that. But there are times when they're wearing things, teeth for example, and all sorts of other stuff that do make that hard. And over time, as you're shooting, those things can just take on a little wear and tear as the day goes along." But the main takeaway here is that the production are really trying to showcase the emotion on the orcs. They mentioned that sometimes really heavy prosthetics can get in the way of the actor's performance. For example, in the Lord of the Rings trilogy, the thick latex material they were using at the time somewhat hindered Gimli's performance before the new, more flexible and comfortable silicone material was developed, allowing the actors' faces to move more freely and express a wider range of emotions. Hopefully this will result in a better performance all around, as the practical technology has developed in the recent decades. From some of our other leaks, we learned that when orcs first show their presence again in Middle-earth, it's a big shock for everyone. This will mostly be shown through the run-ins and orc raids in Bronwyn's village, who will first see and feel their return. We also have learned that just as in The Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings movies, in this series there will also be another important orc character who will have a story arc and could potentially be any one of the orcs shown in the stills. Apparently that orc also looked really similar to another orc from Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. On that note, pure baseless speculation here, but I'm really hoping that at some point in this Middle-earth adaptation, we get to see the return of Jed Brophy. He's proven himself so versatile in the past Middle-earth adaptations. Perhaps that's just wishful thinking, but I think it'd be a unique behind-the-scenes way to make a subtle nod to the prior adaptations and allow him to continue his legacy in Middle-earth. Maybe even as this certain central orc character. Anyway, last but not least, for today's final bit of new information about the orcs in Amazon's The Lord of the Rings, The Rings of Power, we've learned of two different types or classes of orcs that we'll be seeing in this show. There will be a bigger, mighty, and stronger level of orc, perhaps a fighter or warrior class, maybe not too far off from what we're used to seeing in prior Middle-earth adaptations. And then there will also be some smaller, weaker orcs that act mostly as scouts and spies. It will be interesting to see if there are any other levels of this orcish hierarchy that we'll get to have a glimpse into in this series. And with that, that is all we have for now in regards to the orcs in the upcoming Amazon The Rings of Power series, which is now nearly under 2 months away. I hope this video has been detailed and helpful, and enough to whet your appetite for whatever this series has in store for us. Hopefully it's better than maggoty bread for 3 stinking days, and we get a trailer at some point soon. But until then, Namarie Melonin.